Good evening. Welcome to tonight's InfoCast, which is hosted by the Winchester Town Meeting Members Association. I'm Lance Grensbeck, Chair of the TMMA. Joining me is Carol Savage, who's Vice Chair of the TMMA and our expert Zoom wrangler. The topic of tonight's session is the State of the Town Initiative. Our guest speaker, our Select Board member, Bhayani, who is chairing the State of the Town Committee, Michelle Pryor, who chairs the Winchester Select Board. The State of the Town Committee has been reviewing the town's operating budget, capital needs, asset management practices, and our tax and fiscal policies for, I believe, now 7 months or almost 8 months of work. The committee has just issued its final report, and Paris and Michelle will be describing the committee's key findings and the Select Board's next steps. Now, most of you are familiar with the TMMA, but let me remind you that the TMMA is an association of town meeting members. It is not an arm of the town government or an arm of town meeting. As such, we do not vote on or take positions on town issues or articles before town meeting. The TMMA's goals are to improve communications between town hall and town meeting and among town meeting members. In addition to these InfoCasts, we publish the bulletin, which carries updates from town boards and committees. We maintain the forum, which is an online discussion board where town meeting members can post questions, comments, and information about issues and articles before town meeting. And I would encourage you, if you think of questions after today's session, you certainly could post them to the forum, and I know that the Select Board members all read them. We will be recording this InfoCast and posting the recording to the forum and the TMMA's YouTube channel. We will also provide a recording to WinCam for rebroadcast. So if you can't stay for the whole session tonight, you can watch the late night reruns. Or you can join us on Wednesday, February 4th at 7 p.m. when we will host a repeat performance of this briefing, and that meeting will be held in the Select Board room. So it'll be slightly warmer maybe than tonight's. Thanks. I believe a copy of tonight's presentation slides can be downloaded from the box using the link in the Zoom chat window, which we'll put up in a while. And if you have questions during the presentation, what we would suggest, because it'll run 20 or so minutes, is please type them into the chat window so we don't forget them. We will read them out during the Q&A session and then open the floor for questions. So with that, on to tonight's presentation. Paris, Michelle, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'll just say a brief word. So Michelle and I, as Lance said, will take us through the deck here. We'll sort of go back and forth on giving an overview of what is the state of the town, what is the state of Winchester itself, as well as our work here. We'll talk about where the Select Board is tentatively recommending an override, which we are going to be taking a lot of public comment on that over the next couple of weeks. We'll talk about how we've built the operating model, how we've gone through capital and taken a look at that. What are the tax impacts of the varying options here in terms of what an override would look like? How have we thought about mitigating the impact to the degree possible on certain populations? And then how do we make sure that we're doing this all in a fiscally responsible framework? So we'll just go back and forth through that. And so please note down any questions you have, and we'll reserve at least half of the time to go through that. Just before I hand it to Michelle to start, I just wanted to thank Lance and Carol for, I think this is the 5th or 6th of these that they've hosted, and it's terrific. And it's always great to do it with Lance sitting next to us, who of course was the architect of the original State of the Town process. And we have benefited greatly from all of that work in 2019 as we have undertaken our own efforts here. So that'll end.
Thank you. And Carol, if you could maybe pull up the deck. I'm just going to step us through the table of contents. I'll start with just echoing Paris's thanks. I think it is the 5th of these. So as those of you who dialed in the fall, we were, I think, going through our process and some initial findings and where we saw opportunities. Tonight, we're going to talk more about operational impacts and overrides and what that means potentially to tax bills. So if you can go to the next slide, Carol. The table of contents is going to repeat throughout the deck, but I'm going to start with the background and then get into a bit, trade it back to Paris. We'll take turns, as he said, going through the budget model all the way through to fiscal stewardship. And we are certainly looking for feedback. This deck might iterate between now and next week. So if there's areas that you think are unclear or perhaps could be elaborated on, please let us know. We're happy to make some updates. But with that, Carol, if you go to the next one. Next slide, please. This comes directly out of our State of the Town report. We wanted to highlight for everybody, where are we in Winchester? how are we doing? What are we known for? Our academic excellence, in excellence in services and outcomes. We are focused on our natural environment. We have a very robust climate action plan and climate resilience. We have a tree committee. We have a climate action committee. We're doing a lot. There's a lot of investment lately on our waterways and Wedge Pond and trying to get improving our public spaces. We want to foster inclusiveness for all of our long-term residents at all stages of life. And we have, on the right side, there's a lot we've done in the last, at least I've lived here 20 years. In those 20 years, we've rebuilt or renovated 6 of the town's 7 schools. I moved here when the new Ambrose opened. We're on the very last project of our flood mitigation program. Famously in 2010, when I was here, NBC News sent a truck from New York because we flooded the bridge on Mount Vernon Street, and the U.S. Geological Survey was here measuring. We flooded Town Hall, Stop and Shop. It was crazy. We've done so much. The last bit is the Morocco culvert. So we've invested quite a bit in our buildings, in our schools, and in our roads and infrastructure to protect property values, to really extend, to protect this historic building that we're sitting in. We've maintained our AAA bond rating. There's only a handful of communities that do so. So there's a lot that we should be celebrating, but we still, though, face some fiscal challenges. So if you could turn to the next slide, please, Carol. Where we are now, if you've heard this in town meeting from the finance committee, from the select board, from the town manager, we are in a current structural deficit of about $4 million, and that's growing as we're building our FY27 budget. The state of the town process and getting started was to really get us on solid ground and look at where we could deliver services and what we have in a level services manner. Where could we be to be stable for the next 3 to 4 years so that we don't come out for overrides every 2 years? But what would it need to maintain and to grow strategically on the services that our residents want and the school system that our residents expect? So the last override was in 2019, as Paris mentioned in his overview. It's been 7 years since we had that last override. So in advance, in 2020, there was a fax. In 2000, there was a fax committee. In 2019, there was a state of the town. We convened this state of the town in May, June, right after Springtown meeting. We had 6 specific areas of focus, which are up on the screen, which you've heard quite a bit about. In our last meeting of the state of the town in January, we made a commitment, and certainly those members, that the at-large residents that are serving on state of the town, there's an interest in continuing to meet, perhaps on a monthly basis, to actually see that we deliver on some of our structural costs and efficiencies, so that we deliver on fiscal stewardship, if we can pursue regionalization. The group that convened met 20 times exactly, every other Friday, and then sometimes every Friday. But we have a great report, which we get to next. I'll turn it back over to Paris in a minute. But we want to not just sunset this group. We actually want to stay on top of it. We want to make sure that we're looking at delivering on the outcomes that we thought we could achieve. And for some things, maybe they're not going to be feasible. We're going to kick the tires and decide it was a good idea, but not the right time, or perhaps a bad idea. But we don't want to wait 7 years to convene the next state of the town. We want this to persist. So I think with that, I'll do one more, which is who was on the state of the town. So all 5 select board members were included. 3 school committee members were pretty consistent attendees. Finance committee, capital planning had 2 to 3 members. Planning board sent a representative, and we had 7 at-large residents. And the leads for each of those work streams are identified. We had school committee and select board participation on the school and municipal needs. We had capital planning committee and Bill McGonigal, our select board rep, on the capital needs work stream, on looking for other areas of revenue beyond the property levy, and areas of potential efficiencies and savings was work streams that I led, and Paris was across all of them, let's be clear. But he was primary on tax fairness and fiscal stewardship. So, 20 plus members meeting pretty consistently, at-large residents who wish to stay engaged. I'm sure they can always raise their hands and opt out. But I think the select board is committed to making sure that we are giving updates and hearing from residents and delivering on findings that we had. So now we'll turn it back to Paris, and then we'll take it back in about 2 slides.
Great. So what you can stay here for a moment. What we didn't do, and I want to highlight this because I'll get into the report, is to take a look at what our deficit is today, model where the contracts are or would be, take a look at where state funding is going to be, and then pick an override number and put it in front of you. That would have saved us a lot of time. if that is what we wanted to do. And that is not what we did. What we did is look across all of these areas. And when we looked at school operating needs, for example, and you can switch to the next page on the report because it's all detailed there, we had conversations with the school committee and got into the question of what kinds of limits can we put on their contract growth and their all the services growth, which we'll get into. We looked into what are the assets that we can do something different with in terms of capital. And so all of those concepts that we discussed for those 20 meetings are in this report. And we'll let it linger up here because I'm sure everybody is clicking on or scanning that QR link, and who hasn't read it already is going to read this this evening, because we hope that this is a very readable summary of the group's work. It takes about 15 or 20 minutes to read. And it really contains all of the ideas that the group came up with. Some of them are clearly laid out that we're going to be implementing because either the select board, the school committee said, this is something we want to do. A lot of them are ideas that we sized, flagged, put parameters around that we're going to be able to implement as we get into 2026 and beyond, because they're things that just take some time to do. So the report, serves as a document that summarizes all of the work that we did together. We promise it's written in a sort of magazine style, so it's readable. It's not supposed to be an overly technical report, but it's something that, as Michelle said, this group comes back to when we look for non-property tax revenue, when we look at structural costs, when we look at our capital needs, that we have a document that summarized all of our conversations for the past 8 months. So on to the discussion that is probably most of the top of people's minds, and it'll be the bulk of what we talk about this evening. So the main conversation that we're going to spend the bulk of this evening on, which is the general override, the tax override, that is going to be on the March 21st ballot. We had, for those of you who want to watch the long, discussion of it, the debate last night, the select board, a majority of it, did indicate, we didn't take a formal vote, but we indicated a lower bound of 12.5 million and an upper bound of $15 million. That's not all phased in on day one. We were still discussing the way that it would be phased in. We'll talk about some of that as we go through the numbers. But that would be the number that either of those numbers or a number in the middle would be where a majority of the board is today in terms of what we would likely place on the March 21st ballot. You'll see here the operating and capital split. Capital would be infusions into the building or capital stabilization fund. On the lower end of operating, it's 10. Lower end of capital is 2.5. On the upper end, it's 13 and 3.5. You will notice 13 and 3.5 do not add up to 15. They add up to a number greater than 15. So that blue box is important to note as well, which is the board really talked more about that bottom row, 12.5 to 15. And then the breakdown would have to be, for example, if we went with 13 of operating, capital would have to be 2 million or less, because the 15, again, majority of the board's view was that was the highest people were interested in going. So exact nature of the split to be determined, exact number to be determined, but this is what we wanted to start to share with the community to receive feedback. And what we're going to go through for the rest of this conversation, I'll hand it back to Michelle, is what is the budget model? What are the assumptions we've put in it? As well as from a level services standpoint, as well as strategic additions. We'll also talk about capital, and then we're going to talk about the tax impact on homes and what would this mean for people's bills. And that will give people a holistic view of what this package would be.
Okay, so you can jump up to Carol. Now we're going to move to the budget model, and then I'll just dive into, the next one is we have a quick overview of revenue and expense, current situation. So again, if you've been on town meeting, you've lived here long enough, you know that revenue for our town grows at approximately 3%. Prop 2.5 limits us on what we can levy on taxpayers and local receipts, state aid, new growth, parking meter revenue, restaurant taxes. We have a modest amount of local receipts and state aid, but our local revenue grows at around 3%. We will get the governor's budget, I think, tomorrow. We expect maybe some modest growth of the state in education, chapter 70, which is roads and sidewalks. And we do currently receive $1 million in federal aid, which comes down to Winchester Public Schools in Title I. That's always a bit unsure these days if that's going to maintain, but we've built a model assuming that it will persist. Our expenses, this is looking back over a 5-year horizon or so. Municipal departments tend to grow at 3%. That's on level services basis. The schools have been growing faster due to COLAs, steps and columns, and cost of living adjustments to salaries. Historically, schools growth has been roughly 5.5%, give or take. Health insurance is expected to grow at 15%. We don't expect to, some towns may be growing at 8 or 9%. We think Winchester will likely come in at 15%, 14%, but the model expects 15% health insurance growth. Last year, it was 18%, and we were able to negotiate with our unions, bring it down to about 14%. So it's modestly down from last year's initial quote, but that's still not a number you can sustain that 3% revenue. And health insurance, to remind, is every employee of the town, every school department employee, every municipal department employee, and every retired teacher and municipal employee. So we pay health insurance for our current employees. We pay health insurance post-retirement. So we're modeling that. That's a pretty large number. It's a $13-14 million number. And then we have pension and OPEB. So pension is pension for municipal retirees, not teachers. They get their pension through the mass teachers. But we do have post-retiree health insurance. That's growing at 3 to 5% per year. We hope to see our pension fully funded by fiscal year 2028. That's actually 2 years ahead of schedule. I think Lance is on the select board. When we set a policy to get there, we thought by 2030, we'll get there by 2028. When we are fully funded, we still need to do roughly $1 million incremental adds every year to keep it fully funded. We can't just fund it and stop because the needs continue to grow, but we will have caught up, which is a remarkable accomplishment. It could almost go at the beginning of our slides of something else to be proud of. Not a lot of cities and towns will get there as quickly as we will. So that's where we are revenue-wise. We can grow what we can grow. We can levy limits. We can generate local receipts. But these are the expenses that we have to pay to operate our schools, to operate our town, and to give the benefits that our employees have earned, while they've worked here and beyond. So that's where we currently are with our revenue expenses. Go to the next slide, please. So within these actions that we've taken, as Para says, what have we done to look at areas for achieving additional revenue or controlling expenses or adjusting expenses? So within our non-levy revenue growth, we have achieved some interest income as we've borrowed a lot to get our new Lynch School online. We were able to put that money in savings and earn some interest income. We will potentially look at other options to get slightly more positive investment returns on our cash reserves. So we sometimes borrow money to build new schools or do culverts and build the dam. But we always maintain a general stabilization fund in reserve. So we're looking at some options to make some different investments to generate some additional cash and interest income. We reviewed fees and fines. We have over 300 of those. We looked across about a half a dozen peer communities, and we think that there's probably $200,000 in low-hanging fruit. We want to go after that aggressively, maybe starting between now and June, but certainly starting in July. There are some areas where we have some fees that haven't been updated in 15 years, where we are well below market. So we will work with the town manager to get those fees updated. There are also a significant number of fees that you can't change. They're in Mass General Law. So not every of the 300 could we adjust up by $5. Some we can't touch. And as you heard at Fall Town Meeting, Paris and Ken Pruitt and others, myself, are looking at where else can we get some solar arrays in town. We have it all over the new Lynch School. We have an array on the high school at DPW and VO. Are there other places in town? Are there other parking lots in town with ground mounted arrays? Are there other rooftops where we think we could do some leases or get some either lease income or revenue expense reduction? So in our model, we committed last night to try to aggressively pursue about $1.2 million in incremental revenue on a consistent basis, not a one-time basis, but a consistent recurring additional $1 million to add to our revenue. So then flipping to the expense side, we asked the school committee to really look at their 4-year projections and see if their 5.5% growth could start to come down more toward 4.25%, 4.5% over the next 4 years. They've done some creative negotiations. They've looked at their mix of staff and columns and steps and how people are moving through the system. I think they're looking at how they're currently staffed and resources and workloads. And we expect that they'll be able to achieve that 4.25% growth rate over the next 4 years, maybe not overnight, but looking across multi-year union negotiations and benefits and how staff is allocated, we think they can get there. And we appreciate their collaboration on that. That's a significant shift from where they've been in the last few years. On health insurance, as we mentioned, we were at 18% at this time last year. We expect to be 15% growth, but we are on the group insurance commissions trying to benchmark ourselves to the GIC's benchmark plan. We'll look for other areas to potentially find some savings. And as it relates to our retiree health insurance, that might be a longer term sort of analysis that we need to do on the mix potentially, or how health insurance is delivered, or what benefit levels the town is contributing to. That is not a short-term initiative. It may be one of those ideas that doesn't see the light of day, but we want to make sure we kick the tires on it. There's an ever-increasing number of retirees, and it's just part of that larger health insurance number. So those are some areas that we are already taking some actions or beginning to take some actions to try to find some additional revenue that isn't the override, and to try to look at our costs and have them on a more predictable, or at least a consistent sort of expense pattern and cost pattern to the extent that we can predict. I think.
You want me to take the next one, or?
Yeah, why don't we take?
So what Michelle just went through is where each of the assumptions is as it relates to revenue and cost, and then where we've tried to get those numbers through a lot of the work through the state of the town. And there's, as you know, she just went through, different pieces we can factor in, and there's other things we would like to factor in, but we actually have to go out and do the work to achieve it. And so two of the key questions the select board has to answer in design, any select board has to answer in designing an operating override or any operating plan, is how long should this plan last, and how do we measure when it's working and sort of when it's no longer working. And the answers that we've come up with are that on the first question, the select board thinks this should last 3 to 4 years. And we'll talk about why that's a range, but the short way of putting a long story is that we think we can get it past 3, and we're going to work really hard to get it to 4, because the initiatives that get us that last 6 to 9 months or whatever it may be are things that we have to commit ourselves to doing. They may not all be readily available or readily apparent at this moment, but that's the job of the select board, working in particular with the school committee. The second question is, how do we measure that this is still in a decent spot? And we talked about, you talk about a structural deficit. The other sort of bottom line metric is our operating reserves, which is the closest thing the town has to a P&L, and then how much cash do we have left over in the bank. And so the operating reserves that the select board policy that we revised and rewrote in the fall, it says that we need to hold operating reserves basically north of 10%, so 10 to 14%, but north of 10%, in order to protect our bond rating, and just keeping with general good governance. That's what the Department of Local Services, which is part of the Department of Revenue from the state, recommends as well, sort of 10 to 14%. And so when you look at the table down below, and again, there's two operating override, the sort of bottom and top of the range that we're showing here, you can see in FY29 versus FY30, that's 3 years and 4 years respectively, where we would be in the first quadrant, the first 4 boxes, where we would be if we accepted the strategic additions that we have been talking about, and which we'll talk about in a moment. So the select board has prioritized different areas that we would invest additionally on the municipal side, and the school committee has done the same thing on the school side. So with all of the strategic additions that we've accepted, on the select board side, it's about half of the municipal additions. On the school committee side, it's about 45%, I think, of the educational additions. We would be with a $10 million operating override. We would be okay for year 3, and we would be at 4.6%. So we'd below our target for year 4. At a $13 million override, we would be pretty close to fine even for year 4, right? We're 0.5% shy of our 10% threshold. Level services, it's obviously easier to achieve. At 10, you can get to year 4 And then with 13, you can easily get to year 4. But level services doesn't account for any of the investments that we're going to talk about in the next section. So the question you can imagine when you look at this page is, how long should it last? And I think our view is it's going to last 3 and then some, and we're not going to fully get to 4, but we're going to commit ourselves to finding ways to get to 4, number 1. And number 2, what do you do then? So is it strategic additions that are brought down to some degree? Is it incremental revenue that we find? Is it other cost savings that we find? And that's the conversation that the select board needs your feedback on, as well as needs to keep having as a body over the next 3 weeks. Okay. So the next section, if you advance us to perfect, one more slide, is what are those strategic additions that we've talked about? And so on the municipal side, we did a discussion with all of our departments. We had our interim town manager, first our previous town manager, then our interim town manager, go out and talk to our departments. We've had a number of people come to us and have meetings with us directly. For example, the recreation director or the chair of the Council on Aging, our street tree advisory committee. We had a series of conversations with people directly through staff, and then ultimately sat down as a select board over really 2 full meetings and walked through a very long list of different ideas, some of which have an immediate impact, some of which would be phased in over time, some of which may be more optional, right? Maybe if things go well, we would fund them. And what the select board did was ultimately prioritize about half, about $800,000 of the $1.6 million that were put forward. And you can see some highlights of what they are in the 6 bullets below. So, for example, at the Jenks Center, which is people not ever appreciates this, is actually a nonprofit that's independent of the town that the Council on Aging is part of. Do we provide them with a lease payment that can help unlock a renovation of the space that the Winchester Senior Association is trying to do? At the Department of Recreation, the WINRAC, which has grown tremendously in the past 5 years under the leadership of the current director, do we add a little bit to his operating subsidy from the town to allow him to hire an adult education director, incubate some programs, and then spin them out onto the enterprise fund? Because our share of that is less than $200,000 out of a $5 million budget. So he said, can you give me a little more space to incubate, more programs? And then once they get financed, they can survive on fees, but then I can incubate the next program because that is a very popular offering. Conservation priorities, as Michelle mentioned about our waterways, we have a lot of them in town, right? We have a lot of ponds and waterways. We have a tree canopy that is in decline. So are there investments there we can make for wedge and winter and mill ponds, as well as looking at creating a tree program to actually have a professionalized program, as many of our peer towns do. And I won't go through the rest of them, but you sort of get the idea of the types of conversations the select board was having with departments. And again, there's a lot we left on the table in terms of investments that we thought are nice to have, but we weren't ready to prioritize into the budget. And this is a list that will keep evolving as we have feedback from people and as we continue to discuss as board. Similarly, the school committee, as Michelle went through, brought their level services budget down from about 5.5% to 5%, and then followed by 4%, and 4%. So a blended average of 4.25% over the next 4 years. And then they looked at what are the real investments that they think they need. And they had a list of about $10 million. Next time the school committee maybe can present this with us. They had about $10 million that had a bunch of things in it, making, for example, where they have a bring your own device policy, providing devices, and other investments like that. And they had a series of conversations themselves, and then 2 very long briefings at the state of the town, followed by 2 very long conversations with us at the select board table to go through what they really were asking for. And they constrained themselves to saying, let's focus on $1,000 a head, so $4.5 million, of which I'll note about $4 million is in the plan because the last $500,000 is outside of the 3 years that we're looking at the additions for. So they said, if we invest $1,000 a head, can we achieve the necessary sort of strategic investments in the new elementary literacy curriculum, math curriculum, expansion of middle and high school course offerings that people are asking for, and tier 2, which is extra intervention before special education. So in between general education and special education, which the committee's view is ultimately does reduce expenses by reducing the need for special education in all cases. So, this is the view the school committee has given us. We've had a good dialogue with them as a back and forth. Both of these lists, it's obviously subject to town meeting appropriation, but our view was these were thoughtful, prioritized lists that not all of which would go in on day one, but could be phased in over the 3-year period that we're talking about for this override. We'll go next to capital. We do have I think we may have underestimated how long this is taking to get through. So we'll but hopefully not a factor of 2, but we'll see. So the next conversation we'll have is on capital, and then we'll talk about tax impact. So capital was workstream 2, as Michelle said. Bill McGonigal, who is sitting silently to my right, led for us with Enzo Recinato from Capital Planning. Roger McPeak also deeply involved, as was Stephanie Mignardi, as a school committee member of CPC. We looked at what are the total requests. That these are bona fide requests. This is not a mathematical calculation of a depreciation schedule. This is actual requests that they've received in the next 5-year CIP. That's 85.6 million. Total available resources is just under 32 million. And I know people ask this question. Yes, that does include debt service coming off of both of the stabilization funds, the largest share of which was for the construction of Ambrose about 20 years ago. So if that weren't coming off, the 31.7% would in fact be lower. There may be a couple of things that can be removed, Ridge and Lachlan, the intersection out by the farm, maybe Parkhurst, the central office of the schools is going in there on a short-term basis, but maybe that's something we can do something else with. Maybe a couple things can come off. It's worth noting there's probably some things not in it as well. The DPW director, though, for example, has said he needs additional resources for a paving program. And then, as Roger will always tell us, and probably all of you as town meeting members too, things break, and we need to have resources for that when it occurs. So as the workstream 2, which was largely the CPC as well as select board, members, we came up with 8 different packages, taking a look at what are different levels of capital that we would bite off with a operating override that is dedicated for capital, meaning it is infused into either the building or capital stabilization fund. Category H, which is a just over $3.5 million operating override into the stabilization funds, would fund the full CIP, at least conceptually. The full CIP shortfall is about $54 million, and that amount, in theory, could be bonded to satisfy the entire 5-year CIP. Not surprising, that is what the CPC recommended to us, because the view, as all of you have heard as town meeting members, is that we are behind that capital. They also did articulate to us that they view category D, which is the restoration of town hall, and the projects for Ambrose, Lincoln, and McCall, which are critical systems maintenance for roofs, HVAC systems, and at Lincoln, the flat work outside. So none of this is, great enhancement. It's sort of basic maintenance on 3 of our older buildings. They viewed category D, getting, that done as what they would consider the sort of minimum recommendation they would give us. Again, in addition to that, we could then use that other, funding to take care of the more basic needs. The select board, as I said, did debate this, and we have included a capital share of 2.5 to 3.5 million, basically the range that the CPC gave us in terms of what we're going to be considering for this share of the override. Again, it was a majority conversation last night of what we thought was reasonable to include. To give everyone the historical memory, the 2019 override had $10 million in total, 7 years ago, 8 of which was operating, 2 of which was capital. So a 20% capital share. I'm not saying we have to stick with that, but just for people's historical context. The next part we'll get into. So that's the operating piece, what level services are, is the investments that would be prioritized on the municipal side and on the school side, as well as capital. That's where the money would go. So then the question is, what would be the impact of a override of this scale, $12.5 to $15 million on a typical home. So a few assumptions first that we have made, and we can talk about these. The current average, it should say home value in town. It's a combination of different homes, housing stock is about 1.45 million that you see there. You see the breakdown of that in that little table. So our single family homes are more like 1.65. Our condos, which is our other major category, are just shy of 800. The average home is about $1.45 million. We have the average annual tax bill is about 16,500, and we have assumed an override phase in of 30% in year one, 70% in year one, and 30% in year two. So whatever dollars are if approved by the taxpayers, probably 100% of capital is pulled, and then a smaller share of operating, so 70% of the total is pulled in year one and 30% in year two. And as I said earlier, the select board is looking at a $12.5 to $15 million scenario, so that will be what we show here on these pages. So what you see on the next page, and I will describe this in brief. What you see here is the override in blue. That's sort of the fourth or fifth row on the spreadsheet. So there's an initial levy of 16,243 for FY26. That matches the previous slide. By the time this is the first column, CPA is added on of 244. We end up at 16,486. So we enter next year at 16,598. Why does that go up? Because of Prop 2.5, and then that 269 of CPA down below that you see. The override is the 1,077 and the 462, because as I said, it's split 70-30 going in over 2 years. The other thing that we wanted to talk about is that we want to look at the override impact, and we're going to talk about that. We also want to show everybody what is the total impact of other things that are not fully yet hitting the levy. And that's what you see under debt service. So Lynch School, which was approved in January of 2023, much of that is already in the levy. There's a piece of it that's not yet in the levy, and that will go in basically in this next fiscal year at $115 for the average home, and then it'll cap out at $131, at which point it'll be fully in. Morocco Culvert, that's a project all of you are familiar with. Similarly, some of it's in the levy, a little bit that still needs to go in. South Reservoir Dam, same story. Voters approved Lynch and the Morocco Culvert, but it's worth showing it because we want to give people a context. The other thing that we want to show people, again, for the view of having a holistic perspective, is Morocco School. So that is a project that MSBA has accepted us into, but we are at the very early stage of starting. And so what we had to come up with some assumptions. So what we said was, if you take when Lynch was approved in January of 23 and what hit the FY24 levy, let's assume the same size and let's assume the same timing. And EFPBC gave us a fourth quarter of 2028 timing. So we just took the exact same number as we had for Lynch. Conservative assumption, because Morocco is a smaller school. And I don't think school committee is necessarily thinking about it the same way in terms of a full rebuild, but we want to be conservative. So we said, what would that do if it shows up in the 29 and 30 levies? And you see that 212 and 311. So we'll show this to you as this override, and we're going to give you the holistic perspective too. And then you can see down below, my little bracket fell a little down on the page, but that little bracket is supposed to be on the CPA, which was approved in November of 2024. So that is part of it as well. That is already in the levy, but that since it's a 1.5% surcharge, that grows every time you do an override. You do an override, you do an exclusion, the 1.5% is on the whole thing. So CPA grows in tandem with the overall levy, just the way it's structured under state law. Okay. So this is, if anybody wants the sort of deep double click on the $12.5 million override. So 1,094 would be the impact in the first year, about $500 in the second year. And you'd say, well, if it's all taken in the first 2 years, why do you still have $40? Because if you increase the levy slightly above where it would otherwise be, Prop 2.5 is now compounding on a slightly higher number. And that's what those last two $40 are. The bottom row is inclusive of all of the other items. So the debt service, the 3 votes that voters took for Lynch School, Morocco, Culvert, and in theory, they could take 1 day from Morocco School. South Reservoir Dam was done via Chapter 110, but it does have to be factored in, and then CPA. I will not walk through the $15 million slide in the same gory detail unless people want. But these are the same slide basically, just shown for the upper end of what the override would be. So the override impact would be the 1312 plus the roughly $600, okay, over the 2-year period. So this is for the median home, 1.465 million. And what the next page shows, and I'm sure people will want to look at this
Can you scroll?
at home.
We jump, oh,
Yep.
there we are. Yep, sorry.
I think people will want to look at this at home, is what about different home values, right? Because some people live in the median home, most people live in a home that's worth more or less than the median home. And so this shows what is the impact of the override on 5 different home values, starting at 800 and just showing $400,000 increments up to 2.4 million. Again, override impact is what's in yellow. The total impact is inclusive of those debt exclusions, CPA, a future Morocco vote, and which, you know, the select board has to work on the school committee and put on the ballot, but assuming at some point it does happen. And then the total tax bill, you can see FY26 where we are today and where it would go from there. Okay, I won't read these out loud because there's no point, because everyone will want to, you know, hone in, I'm sure, on an individual row on their house. And the next page is the $15 million view of the same perspective. So this is, you know, important information for folks to consume and to think about. This is the cost. We talked about what it funds, capital operating investments, and this would be the cost that we would have. Okay. Last question people asked, and I think this is interesting, but maybe I'm too close to tax policy at this point. So how does Winchester compare to peers? Our mill rate today, which is the rate per $1,000 of assessed value, is just over $11. With $12.5 million override, it would, and this is a set of peers, by the way, we agreed to 8 months ago at the beginning of the State of the Town, not cherry picked. It would go to 11.8 to 12, depending on what the override size is. That assumes, you know, it's implemented over 2 years, and we have roughly 5% appreciation. Now, it's worth noting other towns may move. Arlington, actually, as we were discussing this last night, their select board coalesced around a $15 million override. So when I ran their mill rate of 10.7, it comes up to about 11 and a half. So other towns will move too, based on building a new high school or an override. Towns that don't, if they have compounded growth in their values, and if they don't have an override, they may come down. So we don't know what other towns are going to do, but we just wanted to show where Winchester stacks up now and where it could stack up in the future. Okay. So as all of you know, because we talked about this at town meeting, one of the other key work streams of the state of the town has been, this is what we call work stream 5, how do we mitigate the impact of these types of tax increases on certain vulnerable populations, right? So we have a subset of our town, it's, you know, anywhere from a fifth or slightly more than a fifth of our town that is cost burdened, many of whom are seniors living on fixed incomes. And so one area that we took a look at was the senior circuit breaker, and the select board voted to increase that by about 17%, which we did this fall. We also took a look at the senior tax deferral. This is where folks can pay a portion or even none of their property tax bill if they have sufficient home equity. That would allow them to then defer that into their home until there's an estate event or a sale. And we raised, as all of you know, at a town meeting in the fall, the thresholds of that of 60,000, which hadn't been changed since 2019, to 72 and 109, which are the state caps, to make that program more popular, allow more folks who are equity, who have equity but more limited incomes to be able to defray a portion or even all of their bill. Similarly, we are continuing to look at the senior volunteer program. This is something that allows seniors to volunteer in the Council on Aging or Town Hall and defray their property tax bill. We had dozens more working in the school buildings before the pandemic and working with the school committee to bring that back. And then we also brought forward a expansion of the veterans exemption under the state legislation that was passed in 2024 we brought that forward this past fall town meeting and have doubled that amount as well. So we continue to monitor these programs very closely. If you read the Winchester News, which I'm sure everyone does, Pat Jalen's office pointed out that in the communities that she represents, Somerville, Medford being the other two large ones, obviously much larger communities, all of those communities combined have fewer people participating in these programs than Winchester does. That said, we want to continue to market these and continue to expand the number of people who can participate in these programs. And that's something we're working on with our assessor, and in particular with our COA. People will remember the vice chair of our COA presented with us. The chair of our COA, former chair of the select board, is very focused on these programs too. The other piece that is worth mentioning that the select board has conceptually talked about and 5 members said that they were interested in is at a conceptual level, we did not take a vote, is the creation of what's called a residential tax exemption. And so what this is, and just to jump to the second bullet, is a tax shift that is authorized under state law. Does not affect the overall levy. So the total amount of revenue that the town collects is identical. It does not affect commercial and industrial properties. What it does is it takes, depending on where it's set, a certain subset of our properties. This could be those valued under 800,000 or valued under $1 million, for example, and defrays some of the impact of a tax override on those homes. And then it would, to balance levy out, proportionally increase the same dollar amount on homes above the median. So it is a step that is available to us in state law. Concord implemented it. About 25 towns have them. Brookline and Concord are our closest peers. Concord implemented it after having an exclusion pass for a new middle school that increased taxes, and they had a hit on certain populations, particularly seniors, and they decided to implement a 10% levy. I think our conversation was somewhere closer to 5, maybe up to 10, but in the single digits. State allows you to go up to 35, and it's something that we will explore probably this spring. And then if we choose to do it, we would need to let the assessor know at the November classification hearing, and then everybody who owns a home would fill out a 1-page form attesting that you have an owner-occupied home, and it would allow us to defray the impact on a certain subset of our homes, again depending on where we set the percentage, and assuming that the select board continues to want it to do that. So you take these two pieces together, the senior tax deferral program, the exemption applies to everybody from a circuit breaker standpoint, and then the senior tax deferral is really for seniors who have healthy levels of equity but more modest incomes, and then the residential exemption is for folks who have could be of any age, who have more modest valuations of their homes. And that's how we've thought about the tax fairness piece coming together with the two pieces.
Okay.
Back to you, Michelle.
So, yep, we definitely did not do 35 minutes, so I lost. But here we are on the very last slide. This is both, the wrap up of the state of the town process, and also I think some commitments from the select board moving forward. We want to make sure that we're maintaining our AAA bond rating, one of 14 communities out of 351 to do so. And it's important to note we're one of only 2 that have a tax base that is more than 95% residential. So of the, Belmont's the other, right? Of the other 12 that have AAA bond ratings, they have far more commercial properties. So it's important for us. What that means for us, we talk about we can't lose our AAA bond rating. It allows us to borrow when we're doing large projects, like we're doing debt exclusions, we're building new schools, we're even borrowing on short-term basis bond anticipation notes. We get very favorable rates for our borrowing, short-term and long-term. It saves us, tens of thousands of dollars on small notes. It saves us millions of dollars on large projects. It's not just something that's nice to have and brag about. It actually has a real fiscal impact on what we pay to fund specific investments. So we want to make sure that we maintain that, and we've done a great job to date, but we don't want to lose sight of that specific goal. And that we want to, as a select board, we've changed our operating reserve policies. It's currently 6 to 10. We haven't really dabbled in that 10% since before the 2019 override, in fact. If this override is to pass, we made a commitment to up that rate from 6 to 10 to get from 10 to 14. We'll go up kind of 6% will be the floor, then it will grow to 7, then it will grow to 8. So raising that floor and raising that ceiling over the course of several years. That's something that Moody's would like, the folks that give us our AAA bond rating. And we also think it's just a healthy reserve for us to maintain. So that's a goal that we need to spend more. We also need to save more. We need to spend more to control our deficits and meet our needs. We also need to make sure we have more held in reserves. Long-term debt, another vote the select board took to try to pay off our debt slightly faster. So moving from a level debt payment where everyone had the same levy on the tax bill, but it's sort of like your home. You pay perhaps a little bit more toward principal, and toward the end, you pay a lot less in interest. So trying to actually pay off our debt sooner for 20 and 25-year borrowings, we could shave a year or two off of our overall payment and save ourselves some dollars as well. Not as impactful in smaller borrowing, but really trying to close out our debt and shorten the horizon so that the dollars can be then reinvested in the next initiative or the next thing that breaks. And another thing that I think will come to Springtown meeting is strengthening our OPEB trust management. We have about $9 million in our OPEB trust. That's what we're putting aside to pay health insurance for our current retirees and future retirees. We've worked with the treasurer, and we want to have our commissioners of trust funds, who are 3 volunteer residents, to potentially go out and get a professional investment manager. And at the very beginning, when I talked about our investment in interest income, we think that by having some more professional OPEB trust management, we may be able to achieve more favorable returns on that $9 million current balance, which we expect to grow by leaps and bounds after that pension obligation is paid off. So if we're putting more money into the trust, let's invest it differently. Let's potentially have some better return on our investment. So those are some fiscal stewardship sort of practices we've done, and we're committed to maintaining as we go forward. And that's our last slide. So, and for everybody who's in the room, I'm just surprised you guys came out tonight. Thanks for being here. It was like, dang, no one, I thought it should be me, Paris, Carol, and Lance. We'd have the time. For folks on the Zoom as well, thanks for being here. So Carol, I don't know if we have questions in the chat.
We have questions, yeah.
I haven't been able to look at the chat, so let me.
You can see, I'm not
Now I-
logged in.
Now I can see, okay.
Our practice will be to read off
Thank you.
questions that are in the chat and perhaps alternate
The
those
questions are
questions
outside.
to people in the room, but we'll try to, there's no limit to the time we can stay, so we'll try to answer all the questions.
No, there is a
People
limit to how long we
can
can
also
stay.
they can raise their
And
hand and we
any
can-
questions, if you want people to write them, you don't want them to.
I think it'd be best to have them written so we get them accurately, but yes.
That's fine.
Carol,
in the
you
room?
can read them all. when you-
Yeah, start in the room, I guess.
Anybody in the room want to ask anything?
While people are frantically typing.
Who's not on the select board? Yeah, Jason,
Go
I'll
ahead.
do a question, yeah, I mean, obviously, if
can you just introduce yourself?
oh, sure, Jason Broder, precinct 5.
U.S. member of the Capital Planning Committee.
And also newly part of the capital planning committee, so I'm very interested in all this. The question I have for you is the work around the school budget, looks very impressive. One of the things I thought I had picked up in various town meetings is that one of the pieces of the school budget growing the fastest related to, I'm not gonna probably use the right term, but special education needs broadly. And so I didn't see a line item other than the one that was kind of before that. I didn't see anything else related to that. So I just wondered, was there an assumption in the main model for how that's growing? Is that growth going to continue kind of at a rapid historical clip, or how that might be contemplated?
Stop, I think you're gonna take that one.
You wanna
So,
repeat
Let's
the
repeat the question. We'll give you the microphone.
And Stephanie, why don't you come
Yeah.
on? Sure.
So one of the 3 major asks for what they're calling strategic additions, so it's level services plus strategic additions. So there were 3 big categories that we looked at. So it's curriculum review, that includes literacy and math and all the things that we've been talking about. And then the other one was equity between our elementary schools, 5 different elementary schools. And what was really our second was tiered supports. So tiered supports is you have a tier 1 student can meet the standard with minimal to no additional intervention needed. A tier 3 student has an identified learning disability and is on special education. Tier 2, which is probably a majority of our students, to be fair, is where we're looking to invest more. to support these students, so that way we can provide them alternatives, so they don't just have to go to the IEP because they don't have those additional supports in the classroom. So for example, those math interventionists that we introduced, we have a half in each one of our elementary schools. That's already, we've seen some impact. Some children have graduated off of IEPs because now they're getting small group instruction rather than the one-on-one that an IEP involves. So those kind of investments that we're talking about to address, yes, the rise in cost. And also to provide a more appropriate level of intervention for students. So it's a matter of identifying them and having progress monitoring and the ability to have those support services in the classroom.
Do you want to read that question from
Yeah.
Jennifer?
Yeah, Jennifer Hopefully has a question in the,
Louder. Speak up, please.
there's a question in the chat from Jennifer Heffley. Thank you to everyone who worked on this and your families. It's a lot of time and much appreciated effort. I'm curious about any efforts to increase the commercial tax contribution in town and how much we work with our state and federal delegations to get funds. Another town recently announced, I think, federal funding for water-related projects. Do we pursue these types of funds on a regular basis?
Two great questions. I'll start answering. Michelle, do you want to jump in?
You can start.
Yeah,
I have something to add.
Yeah, so from a commercial standpoint, these are two things we can add to our deck at the risk of making it longer, because they are detailed in the State of the Town report, both of those questions, particularly the first one. So from a commercial perspective, can we increase our commercial base? Absolutely. Is it going to be at a level that is transformational to our operating budget? No, it's not. We do not have the space for large scale commercial developments in town. You have to build roughly $90 million worth of commercial development in order to increase our tax base by $1 million. So it would be more helpful in terms of finding additional commercial property that can be developed than it would be something that we're going to build a big office park. Or I think in the 2019 analysis, you guys said maybe Amazon would come to Winchester. If people remember when Amazon was looking for their East Coast headquarters, they unfortunately picked Virginia, not even Greater Boston, but they didn't come to Winchester, and so we can blame Lance for that. I think
We put an offer in, but
yeah,
we never heard from them.
So it is something though that we are focused on. So what we detail in the State of the Town report, and Planning Board Representative Carrie Layton, the former chair, was an integral member of the State of the Town work. North Main Street, we did a big rezoning on. That is a mixed use corridor. 972 Main Street was the first approval that was just done. It does have commercial space in it. There's obviously a discussion, all of you are deeply aware of it, I'm sure, of the building next door to where we're sitting at 10 Converse. I think there's a clear view there has to be commercial there. So there's continued work on both North Main Street and the Center Business District on mixed use. So residential, that would be combined with commercial. So we want to see growth and we want to see commercial growth, but it's definitely going to be in the incremental revenue camp, not in the transformational revenue camp. The other area that the planning board could look at is what we call the Holton Cross corridor, which is the northeastern part of town. I think people are familiar with it. It's where Little Flippers and some of the other activities are, kids' activities are. That is an area that is zoned for industrial, light industrial now, which is actually a very rare zoning this close to Boston. However, we need to continue to preserve it and invest in it in order to grow that. Some of the concepts that have been floated historically have been more residential focused. And so if we want to continue to rezone that area and make progress there, we can. Like North Main Street, that is something that is a long-term visioning exercise the planning board would do to rezone the area, bring that to town meeting, and then potentially see some benefit there. So definitely something we're focused on. But again, important to keep the size of what that growth would be in mind. With regard to grants are definitely something we regularly compete for. Usually they have a specific purpose. So for example, we have received a number of state grants from DEP for the transfer station. The big grant that we could, that we hopefully will receive as soon as this year, is the climate leaders piece, which we've done all 6 parts. We submitted the application, school committee and the select board unanimously submitted that application. We were, several members, Rickino said on night 1 of fall town meeting, we were accepted into the climate leaders program, and projects like town hall and potentially the solar build out are great projects to submit. And there is, under the state law, what's called a period of notice going on right now that ends in February of 2027. And we want to get into that so we can get $1 million of state funding for either or both of those projects that we think are really well suited for that. So CPC is all over that. CAC is all over that. The select board and town management is very focused on that. For one example, it's probably the biggest, but certainly competing for grants is something we very much do. Planning department and school committee as well.
So I'll just add to that, just two items on commercial base. So Holden and Cross, Paris mentioned, it is an enormous area of opportunity for us. The other thing I would say to residents and everyone listening and anyone who might watch this later, when we have, when articles come up and petitions come up to take zoning and properties out of the commercial zone and put them into residential, we're shrinking our base. Every time a business turns into a nonprofit space or turns into a housing, we are shrinking our base. So we as town meeting can make those decisions potentially on zoning changes. But as residents, if we have commercial businesses, patronize them, keep them in business, give them your business. And if we want to encourage our friends and neighbors to open up new businesses in Winchester, let's go there and let's shop there. We can have commercially zoned businesses, but if no one's in the building, we're not collecting the same kind of tax revenue as a thriving business, with an increased value. So we are doing what we can to grow. We also want to make sure we maintain what we have. I think and those are behaviors we can do as town meeting members. We can lead as select board members, but we can all support as residents. As it relates to federal funding and our delegation, Paris is right about going after grants. Another grant that the Energy Management Committee pursued which paid for about half the cost of the new windows at the Mystic School. The Energy Management Committee got a grant for window replacement, which had never been available to do windows. It was always heating and heat pumps and mini splits. But actually we got new windows at Mystic School, which certainly should help that school stay a lot warmer this winter. And as it relates to our delegation, our town manager is in his third week. He's already met with Rep. Day. He is scheduled to meet with Senator Lewis. He was at the Mass Municipal Association conference over the weekend. He is making those connections to our delegation. We meet with the delegation. The town manager does on a quarterly basis. They've been very responsive to us for needs. We've had earmarks. Leonard Playground was funded with an earmark that we got from in the state budget. So we very much go after grants, but we also are in touch with our delegation on, hey, if there's an earmark, if there's something you can do, if the MBTA can clean up underneath the bridge abutments, we'd appreciate it. So I think it's a great question, and just know that while it maybe doesn't hit the headlines and it's not splashy, there's been $50,000, $200,000 infusions into our budget to make investments in our town that we got through advocacy with our delegation. So that's what I would say to that.
You want to read, Chris?
Chris
Chris
had two questions, and Chris, if you want to unmute and ask these yourself.
Chris, we will try our best to answer these, but these are like deep dives into fun.
Okay, let's see if I can read it. Okay, this is from Chris Nixon. Most AAA ratings in Massachusetts are from Standard & Poor's, not Moody's. When Moody's informed us of their comprehensive review in 2022, there were lots of discussion about switching to Standard & Poor's if need be. On your ratings slide, we are one of only 2 AAAs with 95% residential tax base. Can you get similar stats from Standard & Poor's and include these two? I feel it would give a bigger picture and likely bolster the argument. Some may discount the ongoing references to AAA Moody's ratings as the quote N is small, unquote.
So, and Chris's second question is also sort of technical. I'm going to volunteer Michelle and I and Stacy Ward to have coffee with you, and we can answer these questions in great depth. But I'll answer it in brief. I appreciate they are quite specific. So you're absolutely right. S&P has many more AAA communities in the state than Moody's does. Current new town manager raised Cohasset to an S&P AAA. Moody's is a harder one to achieve. You're right when the underlying supposition of your question, which is if you go to market with an S&P rating, do you really get a different rate? Hilltop's best answer, our technical advisor on this question, is at this point in 2026, probably not. So why do we continue to look at Moody's? Number one, it is the harder rating to get, and it is our agency. So could we switch to S&P? Sure, but we have a AAA rating for Moody's, and we do want to maintain that. both because it lowers our borrowing cost. And if we needed to, we can switch to S&P, but also because it's a really great indicator of how well run and the quality of the financial management and the quality of our financial team with Stacey Ward and our veteran town management that we've put together. So we see it as a great indicator of where we are, as well as as Michelle said, a useful tool we can use to keep our borrowing costs low. On the operating reserve policy, Moody's has this weird metric called Moody's available reserves that we've done a lot of work to try to correlate to town operating reserves, and that's how we came up with the 10 to 14%. The S&P methodology assigns the highest rating at 15%. So it's not as though if we switch to S&P, we would change our operating reserve policy. We looked at that S&P, the S&P scorecard, and we also looked at the Department of Local Services guidance when we wrote the 10 to 14 policy. It was not solely based on Moody's, it was based on sort of all of the inputs.
And the second question is about
The Morocco
I
culvert,
can read it again. On your, here goes the second question.
the duration.
On your ongoing debt service slide, you show Lynch coming online and you mentioned the Morocco culvert. Question one, Morocco included both the culvert and the building, the Morocco Life Extension Plan. Given the nature of the Morocco school work, we could not bond more than 10 years. I thought this applied to the culvert too, since it was part of the same question, but can't recall for sure. Do you know the length of the culvert bond and can you make a note of that on this slide?
We're happy to look that up. It's worth noting it is longer than the period we're looking at. So we're looking at through FY30, all of those debt exclusions, the Lynch School, the Morocco culvert, the South Reservoir Dam, and the Morocco School, which doesn't even exist yet as a project, all of those would go beyond 2030. Whether they're 10 years or 25 years, eventually all of them will drop off, but none of them are dropping off inside of the model that we're looking at.
Yep.
No questions? Come on. Other questions?
Maybe you need to watch the presentation again to ask a question again. I don't know.
Yeah, feel free next time. Anybody? I think we lost.
Well, you can certainly ask the questions through Carol, Lance, TMMA, or us directly. But if there are some questions or areas of clarification that we can do to expand on the slides, please do let us know. We're doing this again next week.
If you just pass the.
This may be a preview of what you'll see at the town meeting on February 9th as well. So if there are slides that people just think are, too dense, or we want to use different colors, truly, let us know. We will give this presentation again on February 9th, some version of it, maybe with deeper dives, but we'd love that feedback. This is a bit of a dry run for this deck.
And on that point, there are other opportunities. February 9th, as Michelle said, it's in Amy's or the TMMA account's email that went out an hour before this meeting. We have put together, Michelle and I put it together today with Patty from the town manager's office, a little one pager that has all the conversations between now and February 14th. So February 9th, we have one. We have two next week. We have one on February 10th. And so, whether you want to come to another one or you want to steer others to, we do want to continue to get feedback from the community.
Couple of positive comments and thank yous from Pamela Court. Thanks so much for the enormous effort it took to do this. Heidi Rutstein, this makes a good case for the override. Janet Boswell, thank you for taking the time to bring us up to speed before the special town meeting. And the link to the slides has been put in the chat again, if anybody missed that. Catherine Curtis, thanks you also.
I believe Amy said she posted the link here in the chat.
Yeah.
And she
It is.
also, Amy, correct me, but I think she also put the links to the box where the main report is. And if town meeting members would like us to do this, we can maybe prevail on Amy to send out a single email that says, as the report, the one pager and the slide presentation. So you can read it all at once over the next weekend. So we'll see if we can do that just to send out this the report, the presentation slides, and the one pager, just so they're all a packet. People can have quick access.
Great, that's Amy. So she's happy to do that. Amy is Amy Potak. She's our communications manager.
She's extremely well organized, so you're in luck.
All right.
Yeah, what is the voting process? Like, is there gonna be, is it a majority vote through town meeting, and is there gonna be?
Great question.
Did everybody online hear that? Do you
So
want
it's a great question. Eaching asked, what happens at town meeting? So on March 21st, the general public votes on it. There's no official town meeting vote, and Michelle was actually editing the language that's gonna go in the packet on this today, which I saw a copy of with our council. The only article on the warrant for the special town meeting is Article 1 to hear reports of boards, committees, and officers. So this is an informational briefing for town meeting, and you might ask them, why are you doing that? The answer is, depending on the outcome of the override, town meeting is going to have to take different types of action in spring town meeting. So we thought it was first important for everyone to be aware of it. You're here tonight, and so you've got at least a sense of what the state of the town work is. But we also want to talk about, as they did in 2019, and when overrides have been done historically, they have always called, in most cases, special town meetings. We wanted to tell town meeting, this is what happens if it passes, this is what happens if it doesn't pass.
Yeah, if what we discovered in 2019 was that under Massachusetts general law, a debt exclusion, for example, to fund Morocco, goes first to the town meeting and then to the voters. A general operating override skips over town meeting and goes directly to the voters. We were a little surprised to find that, which is why in talking with Peter Haley, who was the moderator at the time, we said, that is not going to set particularly well with town meeting members to be ignored in the process. Can we create a special town meeting in which we at least briefed all the town meeting members about the coming override? And he said yes, but it was restricted to, as Para said, a Article 1 report only. You couldn't sit and debate and take a thing on it. But we thought it was worth doing at the time. And again, I think the select board has decided that's what they'd like to do.
And now we have TMMA. We're also doing the preview to spring town
Yeah.
meeting.
And would this pass with a simple majority vote through the town?
Correct.
Yes.
Not to be a devil's advocate, but we have nearby towns that had overrides that didn't pass. To touch on what you know about what the consequences of that has been for those towns.
The question from Caitlin was, what would be the consequences of an override not passing? And so we have our budget summit tomorrow with the town manager and with the superintendent, the school committee and select board. And what you did not see in this is, here's what happens if it passes, here's what happens. Well, you did see here's what happens if it passes. You didn't see here's what happens if it doesn't. And that is one of the key topics of our budget summit tomorrow. Because the budget summit is focused on the FY27 only budget. So that will be one of the things that is not in the TMMA briefings, but would be at the special town meeting in 3 weeks.
And I think Caitlin options would be potentially a town meeting, right? To use free cash to adjust the budget if it didn't pass. We would know the answer in March before town meeting takes up the budget in May. But as it relates to other towns, I think what we've seen is they are back the next year. They are back within 18 months with another override question, usually a higher amount, not usually a lower amount. And they will, potentially pause hiring or lay off people while they're waiting for the next override to pass. But we've seen Melrose has had some fail, Stoneham has seen it fail, came back again within 18 months or 2 years, and they passed. And maybe got some of what they wanted, but maybe not everything. So I think if it were not to pass in March, I can't imagine the select board would just say, okay, let's not try again for 3 to 5 years. I imagine we'd be right back at it. I can't speak for everybody, but I would think that would be the plan.
I think that, and I think it is so that's why we need to work with the school committee partners, because 70% of the operating budget, 65% is on the education side. So then the question becomes, what would the school committee's reaction to that be? What would town meeting's reaction to that be in the spring? And then what would the select board do from there? It's a very, at that point, iterative conversation that looks at the fiscal health of the town, spending, the cuts, the reaction of the public. Seamus?
I appreciate Michelle bringing up Melrose. I was just curious, having partially lived through the Melrose override because I was working there for part of it. Was there any consideration given to kind of the tiered structure that they used for their override? And we all discussed a range and they, for folks who aren't familiar, Melrose put forth 3 different numbers and people voted on 3 different questions for 3 different amounts. And it was certainly novel to me. So I was just curious if that was at all discussed or considered or.
Not yet.
Candidly, it was not. And here's why. So Stoneham and Melrose did that this year. It was pretty innovative, right? And that was something that they really just came up with quite late in the game. Their first override, the one you're describing that didn't pass, was a single question, as was Stoneham's. When they didn't pass, and then they came back on the second go, they did, and you're right, Melrose was 3, Stoneham was 2.
Yep.
There's one town in the state that has 2 capital stabilization funds, and it's Winchester. So we already have a complicated ballot design question, right? We talked about, should we do it as an exclusion? Then you'd have 2 questions. The board yesterday seemed to be focused on doing 1 question, but it has multi-parts to it, right? So the 2019 question had 8 million of operating, 1.6 million to the CSF, 400,000 to the BSF. So we structurally have a more complicated question than pretty much any other town. And then so to add to that, you have 3 questions, you have 3 splits rather on the ballot potentially, to add to that multiple options for something that's kind of a new concept that hasn't really been done outside of these 2 towns that had failed overrides. It's really not something we discussed or debated.
Yeah, I think it's actually a fair question. I think the hope is to coalesce around a number as a board. So, and this process will be multiple hearings, a town meeting on February 9th, and a vote no later than Friday the 13th, because the ballot has to the language has to be finalized by February 14th. So I don't know that we'll find ourselves the 11th hour doing 2 questions. Our hope is to land on 1 amount.
No, I would, in 2019, we explored the question of whether we should ask a higher amount and a lower amount or break it into operating and capital. Stoneham did that recently. They came back and said 12 or 9 and voted 9. The consensus of the board at the time was that tended to feel like you were gaming the voters, offer them a high one, offer them a low one, and bet that they'll take the low one. And our decision at the time was to go with a single one because we did not feel that gaming the town was an appropriate way to go. You either picked a number and explained it well, or you didn't.
Yeah, the other thing that's really strange about that structure, because it's so new in Massachusetts, is that the highest number wins if it gets 50% plus 1, not the one that has the most votes.
Yeah.
So even if they have 3, for example, and the middle one gets the most votes, and the top one passes with 1 vote more, like it's 50% plus 1 vote for the top one takes effect, even though more people voted for the second one. So it's just a new ballot design that I think people sort of need to maybe get more used to before we would consider that. It's a great question.
Yep.
Good questions.
Okay.
Last call for questions. It's only 8:30.
Stop it, Lance.
Okay. Thank you all, and those of you all online for participating. A reminder that we will have, the TMMA will sponsor a rerun, same actors and actresses in place. That's going to be on Wednesday, February 4th, again at 7 p.m. If you would like to attend in person, it will be in the select board room. If you want to attend via Zoom, it's the same. We'll get the link out to you, but it will be, this is the rehearsal, so that will be the full Broadway production on that.
Exactly.
On the 4th. So we'd invite all of you to do that. Again, we're in the process of cleaning up and it's adjusting the forum, the discussion board. If you have questions that you did not think of tonight, or you would like information, or you have suggestions about additional slides or take slides out, and you would like to get that, please enter it, either send it directly to Michelle and Paris, or put it in the forum, and we'll try to forward those on for recommendations. So thank you very much. You can push
There was one, I don't know, Heidi, did you want to say that comment?
Sure. So I think a lot of people who know me know that I have typically been against overrides because we haven't had a good revenue plan or a good explanation as to how we are operating. We need to justify to the voters that we're doing something to grow our town's revenue. This is the most comprehensive plan I've seen. It's a great deep dive. And I think as town meeting members, we really need to get behind this and be supportive. The voters will see the benefits from this override, and we need to explain it to them so that they understand. Now, nobody wants an increase in their taxes. And some of the ideas that are shown here will be really helpful in explaining to different brackets how it will benefit them and how it will impact them and the things that can be done to mitigate some of the financial burden. And I cannot thank you. I mean, I've loved our select boards. We've had great people on them, but I have been looking for this for decades since I became involved, and I cannot thank you enough for the hard work and effort that all of you have put into this. I'm so happy to support this, and I'll do what I can to make sure that this passes. Thank you.
Which reminds me, Josh Erpic called the other day and said, would it be possible for the select board or TMMA to put together small decks of information about,
No, don't look at me.
short decks of information about the override and some of the other issues, and get those out to particularly the precinct chairs, but something that the town meeting members could use if you have a meeting or if your neighbor in residential area, people say, what's this all about? Can you get something out? So,
We're putting together a
some
two-pager
two pages,
memo.
okay.
It'll definitely be a good summary for a town meeting member. We'll see if that needs to be tweaked further to communicate kind of to someone more.
So Josh is committed to sort of seeing what kind of topics and issues and what kind of things, but that sounds like it would be exactly the sort of thing he was looking for the precinct chairs and other town meeting members. So we'll work on
I
that.
gave that a thumbs up.
Okay. So I guess if there are no more questions, now that we're about to close the door, thank you all and enjoy shoveling out tomorrow morning a little bit more.
Wait, is it snowing?
We don't know. We're in the basement.
Oh, God.
All right, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So.